Miss M. It's been about 12 or so years now. I know you don't work there anymore, thankfully. I don't know what could possess an adult woman, 50 plus no less, to torment a child to the breaking point. Maybe you're just a miserable old lady who was a loser in school, and so you targeted other losers to bring yourself up. But how you treated me and evidently others was not only unprofessional, but very cruel and damaging. I was a good student before. Miss M had my family members in years prior. Unlike me, my cousins and siblings are rowdy and can be a handful. She had words with my family before, so when I came along, I was the symbol of my family of which she would take out her anger upon. I was meek and obedient, a perfect target. Miss M would humiliate me any chance she would get. She would bring me up in front of class, call me stupid, an idiot, ugly, pointed out that my legs weren't shaved, told me that I looked like a boy. Mind you, I had long hair and stuff. I just didn't wear makeup at that age. Talked to me very slowly if I asked any question. Talked to me like an actual dog. A bad girl, go fetch, bag, etc. Told me that I smelled bad. The list goes on and on. She would sometimes aggressively pat me on the head and shout, "Good girl," when I completed one of her dog commands. She would actively encourage other kids to make fun of me as well, and further isolated me from everyone. I started to fear any interaction with her. I feared my classmates as well. A boy in my class was being relentless and made me cry one day, so I retaliated and threw a pencil at him. I was berated heavily and treated even worse after that, so I learned to shut down and take it all. My grades slipped. I cried every day at home. I kept most of it to myself, which Miss M probably knew I would, which is why she went so hard at me. My parents did try to get my class switched, but the school refused. Not only did Miss M act like an angel around other adults, but the other classes were apparently packed to capacity, so I couldn't switch. But I also don't think my parents tried very hard. The teacher conferences made things worse each time. She'd be alright for a day or two, but the hammer would come down harder. I had to keep all of the torment inside to survive. She made fresh hot chocolates for the class the day before our Christmas break. When she gave me mine, I was scared and accidentally knocked it over on myself. I always was a clumsy kid. Instead of being concerned in the slightest because it was literally scalding hot, she let out a flurry of screams and threatened that I had better get it clean quickly and spotless, or she would make me sorry. I did as I was told, and ignored the searing pain in my foot. I was not allowed to call to get a change of clothes, and I was the only one not allowed to have more. The pain in my foot stabbed literally every second. It didn't let up all day, but I was so terrified. I said nothing and didn't shed a single tear, though it hurt like crazy. When I got home and pulled my sock off, my skin came off with it from the burn. My mother was livid and finally stood up for me. After Christmas break, Miss M was so overly sugary to me. "Why didn't you tell me about your foot, sweetie?" and was overly accommodating. It scared me. I thought it was a trap. But to my surprise, it lasted about 2 weeks. She must have had her butt handed to her. She wasn't as bad as before, but still sought to crush my spirit. On the last day of school, she refused to let me take any pictures of her. I wanted one to burn. She was very grouchy that day toward me, almost acting defeated, because although my grades were bad, I skimmed by and was moving to middle school. Her dog was off its leash and she was powerless to keep her toy. She was hoping that I would have failed. After 6th grade, I stopped caring about school. I failed a year, barely skirted by others, landed in a dropout prevention program in high school. I had few friends, and none of which I still have. I fought it hard to trust teachers or authority figures anymore. I never made scenes or anything. I just sat quietly and did nothing. Before, I actually tried, actually cared. And I had teachers that were disappointed in me because of how well I performed in math and on tests. I've never had test anxiety and they wanted me in the mathletes one year, but I just didn't care, which I attribute, at least in part, to Miss M. She changed my life for the worse. The psychological damage that Miss M did to me cut deep. It's hard to convey in a brief post what it was like every day for that whole year. She tore down what confidence I had. She made me afraid to trust anyone. She made me believe that I was worthless. She made me feel every insult and criticism to the bone. She made me close into myself and learn to take abuse. She made me believe I was completely alone and had no one in my corner. The kids from my school that came with me reinforced it as well. They also believed that I was just dumb and they treated me as such. She dug her claws in deep and the scars still remain. I've tried to grow past it, but it's a hard thing to overcome. So do you, Miss M. You are not a teacher. You're a sociopath who used their power of authority to tear down a child. I hated you then, but as an adult, I just feel sad for you. I don't know what could possibly go through an adult's mind that would make them do that to a kid. Maybe you saw yourself in me and hated yourself, since we were both kind of outcasts. So you desperately tore me down and encouraged others so you could finally feel like you belonged, even if it was just a bunch of kids. Either way, I'm glad you were finally removed years later, and I hope that your stain in the world is soon wiped clean. I hope the others that you did this to live happy lives without having you as even a passing thought. We're not weak, and we do not deserve to be held as your victims. You did teach us that there are bad people out there. We may have struggled from it, but we pushed on. Hopefully none of us will ever meet you again. When I was a student teacher, I was 21 and working with mostly seniors in high school, many of which were 17 or 18. One day, the mentor teacher I was working with pulled me aside from teaching my class to inform me that other teachers had overheard some students telling each other what they wanted to do to me. While disturbing, many of my friends and colleagues insisted that it's a fact of being a younger teacher working with high schoolers. The next day, I had a few girls in my class approach me and inform me that 3 specific boys were no longer just talking about what they wanted to do, but they were describing what they were planning on doing to me in the coming weeks, after school in the parking lot. Far more details than I would like to share. I went to the administration immediately, and they handled it very quickly and professionally. I was very grateful for their support. I was never touched nor harmed by any of these students, thankfully. What scared the absolute crap out of me, however, is not even a week later, one of the boys was arrested and pulled out of school. I didn't find out immediately, but I eventually learned he was being held for the alleged assault of his younger sister. It makes me sick thinking about it still. I genuinely hope to never meet him again. It's terrifying to think what could have happened had I not had some wonderful staff and students looking out for me. This was quite a while ago, so bear with me. I was a sophomore in high school finishing up band practice. It was the afternoon, maybe 7:30, and me and my friends are just talking for a bit. We always chatted a bit after practice to avoid the crowd of people in the band hall. Plus, it gave us a chance to unwind a bit. We see one of our friends, a freshman, talking to his dad and his younger sister. Now, none of us had ever spoken to his dad before, but we had heard things and knew that he was a bit, shall we say, off. So that's why we didn't really question what happened next. My friend was chatting for quite a bit and finally the dad calls us over. Now, the guy my friend is talking to looks remarkably like him. Same hair, same skin tone, very similar mannerisms. The guy is pretty greasy looking, and he seems visibly uncomfortable, and is obviously in a huge hurry to get out of there. He's shuffling about and won't keep eye contact, and he seems to be eyeing us up and down in a strange way. But again, he's our friend's dad and we know he was a pretty strange guy, so we're not really thinking much about it. He talks about how he wants us, me and 3 of my friends, all trombonists, to play for him in a Cuban jazz ensemble that he's putting together. We're all pretty big into jazz at this time, and he mentions how we'll be getting paid for both practices and performances, and we're all very excited. He is very insistent on us leaving with him that moment to meet the rest of his bandmates, and me and my friend are all for it. And now, we haven't really been noticing the girl standing next to him this whole time. She's been very quiet the whole time, but she was very visibly uncomfortable with the entire situation. By now, our band director has noticed us by this point, and he walks on over. She was a very no BS, hard-ass kind of person. She comes and asks, "Who's this guy?" Of course, I think she's mad because we've been taking our time and putting our stuff away. So, I respond, "Oh, he's just our friend's dad. And right then, my friend cuts me off and says, "What? He's not my dad." Now at this point, the man gets very irritated. Our director tells him that he needs to leave. And this is when I start noticing the little girl more. First of all, she looks nothing like this man. This is pure conjecture on my part, but her skin color, eye color, hair color, none of them match him. The man starts arguing with my director, saying how she can't talk to him like that. He seems like he's about to punch our director. By this point, he's attracted some attention, and our 2 other directors are here as well. The little girl is grabbing him by the shirt, trying to keep him back. She's not crying, but her voice seems like she's about to. She's pleading for him to stop and asks him to please just go home. Now, this is the first time that the girl spoke to me, so this is when I first get a good look at her. She's very thin, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and is younger than us by maybe a couple of years. She has some pretty obvious bruises and, as mentioned above, looks nothing like her dad. Finally, it seems the man's given up. He's attracted quite a crowd and he shuffles off. He doesn't really run to his car, but he goes off as quickly as he can without actually running, tugging the little girl at his side. They call the cops, and the cops circled the area looking for him and his car, but there's no sign and we never see him again. After the incident, we spoke to our friend about it, and he mentioned how the little girl approached him first and tried to get him to get into their car before the man finally got off the car and started to talk to my friend himself. I'm not too sure what was going on that date. I don't know what would have happened to us had we gotten in the car with him as planned, but it definitely psyched me out for a bit, and I'd completely forgotten about the incident until I was browsing this subreddit and it came back to me. Finally, I would like to add that we've since met the friend in question's dad, and they look remarkably similar, which is a weird coincidence. This story happened when I started at a new school in the middle of 6th grade. I'm 19 now. This was technically my first middle school, and for many reasons I transferred out. This definitely didn't help. I had almost always had a foreign language class, so I thought it would be a pretty easy grade to end with. There was a lot of buzz surrounding the Spanish teacher, Mr. D, and when I first saw him and how he acted, I thought I could tell why. He was a pretty eccentric guy who, if you only heard his voice and weren't looking at his stern face, you would think that he was pretty jovial. He almost always pronounced our names wrong, and he had this gigantic windmill on wheels in the corner of his room. The windmill reminded me that I had actually heard about this teacher from an older boy called Jay in my Sunday school class. It's weird how things can change so much in a number of years. I remember telling him that I was going to his school. My mom and I had run away in the middle of my 6th grade year, and I would start my new school after Christmas break had ended. It was nice to know that I had at least a couple of people that I knew, so I asked if he could tell me about the school, or if he had any advice. Jay had told me that if I ever got Mr. D, to transfer out immediately. It sounded a little bit dramatic, but as we got more acquainted with Mr. D, so too did he get more acquainted with us. One thing that always made us all uncomfortable was how he would rub chapstick on his lips fairly aggressively for like a minute, which was definitely made worse when he would stand with one leg resting on something and his crotch leaning forward. Sure, it was pretty uncomfortable, but not the worst thing in the world, just a bit odd. Have you ever seen a woman with her boobs resting on a desk? Sometimes it's on purpose and sometimes it's an accident, really when you're short and sitting down. Mr. D started to do this, but with his you-know-what. He would stand close to a desk to look at their work, but his bulge would be laying on their desk. He wasn't desk height either, so he stretched a little to do it, but given how strange he already seemed to be, I brushed it off as him not being self-aware. I just felt bad for the first row. Flash forward, and all of his little idiosyncrasies seemed to be more prominent as the days marched on. I remember once he even answered his phone and carried the conversation on a bit before stepping out of class. I should note that he wasn't a great teacher. He wasn't even a good teacher. English obviously wasn't his first language, which was fine because he was there to teach Spanish. But unfortunately, he couldn't speak Spanish either. He would always use the school PC to pull up Spanish videos on YouTube for us, and he would mindlessly stare at his personal laptop. Like I said, a pretty easy class. I just feel bad for the other students who didn't already know certain things when tests came. We walked in one day, and on my desk, the chair in front of mine, and the desk in front of mine, there was a semi-straight line of off-white liquid. It was mainly on my desk and thinned out across the chair and desk in front. Mr. D came over, not quite fast enough as the kid behind me asked what it was. All he got was nothing, as he very quickly wiped it away with his hand and rubbed it on his pants. He couldn't say water because it wasn't clear. It really only looked like one thing, but there wasn't any way to definitively prove it was. I tucked my hands in my sleeves and did my best not to touch the desk. About a week after that, I came into my English class that I had at the end of the day to hear one of the girls having a pretty loud argument with our English teacher. I walked in at the middle, but the girl, Megan, was extremely upset and asking why she couldn't go to the principal. Megan was a bit of a hothead, sure, but she was still a really nice girl. I couldn't see her dramatizing a situation this much. I later found out what had happened from my best friend at the time, who was in Mr. D's class when it went down. Their class was ahead of us, so their test was scheduled for that day. After papers were passed around, Mr. D went back to zoning out on his laptop until Megan needed to ask a question. She had had her hand up for ages and he never noticed, so she went over to where he was and freaked out on him. He was watching some inappropriate material with the sound off on the laptop that he always brought with him and gave all his attention to. So, when I came in, Megan was being reprimanded for being pretty verbal with Mr. D. Our teacher was basically telling her that she shouldn't have been upset with a teacher watching that in class, and that it's his laptop, as if that nullifies anything. Looking back, it explains so much of his shifty behavior, resting against the desk, the hardcore staring, the personal laptop all the time, and the definite stuff on our desk. It wasn't the first time that he had done it, and it wouldn't have been the last if he hadn't gotten suspended for the rest of the month. Mr. D disappeared and we had a sub finish out the rest of the year with us. I got the heck out of that school after everything that had happened there, but still kept in touch with a couple of friends who went. They told me that Mr. D was back, but for a while he was the gym teacher and co-soccer coach, and the next year he taught English. I really want to say that it surprises me that he was brought back, even without knowing anything about what he was teaching, but it doesn't. In hindsight, that school was atrocious. I have so many memories of bad stuff students and teachers alike did. Another teacher was only given a suspension for actively looking down girls' skirts and up girls' skirts when they bent over. It's just concerning to know that Mr. D probably still works there. I don't know what compelled me to finally share this, but I've been thinking about it a lot the past few days and thought that it would fit this sub relatively well. I'm one of those long-time lurkers who has been sitting on their own story for ages, but I finally got around to writing down my own experience, and I hope someone out there finds this interesting to read. Apologies in advance for the length. I have a lot of thoughts about this, as it was the first and only time I felt legitimately afraid for my life. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's a long, ranch-style home, on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. These streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses cradled by big, scenic California Valley hills all around. We were never wealthy, but my grandpa had bought it up as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value had skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot, and although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside of our house. Although my mom was especially protective all of our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everybody who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple of dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity that I noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road, opposite to the gas station, right along the back side of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by an opaque beige curtain. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive that someone was living inside of it because, at times, I would hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, usually as I passed the camper door, and I would always keep an eye on it for the fear that, one day, it would swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy, a sketch of odd lines and a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerves to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just gone to the park nearby and, unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when she walked past it. This time, I felt a little more brave. I was frustrated at not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we had soaked printer paper in black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing that I had stopped following her. but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked like to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was a badly deformed fetus inside a mass of large, perfect circles, like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that it stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I had never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body and my chest hurt with fear. But I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mother. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings towards the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time that we drove by. And about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I had seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified that she would make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it would go away. We walked past the camper and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable, and I was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound, like a heavy backpack, and nervously, I turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle. Like each of his feet were unimaginably heavy and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arc of his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction, like a zombie with the direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years that we had spent living there, and realized that this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning and I stared straight ahead again. The wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without licking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. "On the count of 3, we race home," she told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood that we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily, while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start, by sprinting our direction before she got to 3. But his footsteps were noisy, and we bolted like deer the instant that we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm, or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast that we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me about 10 seconds later, I saw him running in our direction, with absolutely none of the impairment he had showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guard so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without looking behind us, we yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as we could. I don't even think that we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adult as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about. I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity. And that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered the incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted that he had to have been a bored homeless man looking to scare some kids walking home, with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I would like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the parking gas station deliberately, due to the number of kids walking around the area. I never saw the camper again after that day, or so on. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and I would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around and yourself. I don't know if maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way that I can't forget. So, possibly deranged camper guy by the gas station, whatever your intent was, let's not meet. I used to daydream about driving across the country in an RV and seeing the world. I had a wanderlust like no other, and the van dwellers of Instagram really made it look so easy and fun. I was hooked, and after I made up my mind, I bought a van and souped it up with a bed, drawers, storage, a bike rack, and even a little bathroom area. The tiny home on wheels held so much potential and the future looked bright. Or so I thought. I made my way to the first destination on my list, Charleston, USA. It was beautiful, and I had dreams of spending my days on the beach and watching the sun rise and set each morning. Well, as some of you may or may not know, this was a van and some stealth camping needed to be done to ensure safety and that I wouldn't get towed or bothered by law enforcement. Volume levels were low and lights were always dimmed when I spent time in my van. Not only that, but the windows were tinted, and I had curtains as well, so you really couldn't see anything through them. One of the first nights, I decided to park in a back alley parking lot, with no streetlights and no pedestrian traffic. I felt safe and comfortable enough to relax and play some Pokemon on my DS. I was propped up on a pillow that was laying against the back double doors. About 30 minutes after I had parked, I noticed a man walk past my van. He seemed to be in a hurry, so I didn't pay him any mind. About 15 minutes pass and I hear a jingle sound and then scraping noises. I turn around and there he is. The same man trying to break into my van as I'm sitting in it. Our faces are only inches apart through the glass. He doesn't see me. In this moment, I kind of reacted as you would if a dog does something and you want to get its attention and make it stop. I have dogs, so this was automatic. And I made a sound that was sort of like, "Hey!" Well, that'll get his attention. And he looks up and squints at me. I say, "Get the heck out." He goes, "Oh crap," and he runs off. Looking back, it was kind of funny as I knew he didn't mean me any harm, and probably crapped his pants when he found out that I had caught him. It was really the next night that made me realize that van living isn't all it's cracked up to be. I decided to park in a more crowded area the next night. Before hungry and down, I drove to a nearby grocery store to grab food. Little naive me thought, since this is a grocery store, I should be able to have my lights on bright and not be bothered. I turn the lights up and do some cleaning before bed, folding clothes, fluffing pillows, sweeping, etc. I notice a car across the parking lot that's cranked up with its lights on, but hasn't actually pulled out yet. I don't pay it any mind and I finish up my cleaning. The next thing I know, the same car is driven up behind my van and is just sitting in the lane, not moving. I wait for a while and it doesn't budge, so I decide to cut off my lights and sit in the driver's seat to observe. It still doesn't move. My internal alarm system is going berserk, so I decide to get the heck out of there and crank up my van so I can leave. I need to pull out, but the car is blocking me. I start inching out in reverse and the driver finally gets the message and drives away. I watch the car leave and stop at an intersection. There are only two ways it could go, I thought. It could either go left, which exits the parking lot and means that the person isn't a threat, or it could go right, which circles back into the parking lot and means that this person possibly is a threat. I wait and watch, and for some reason, I don't see which direction the car turns. I chalk it up to getting confused and being paranoid. After a few minutes, I decide to leave. Remember when I said that there were only two ways the car could go? Well, I was wrong. There was another way that it could go, and that direction is straightened into another parking lot. When I arrived at the intersection, wouldn't you know, it's the car from before and its part still cranked, with the lights on, facing the intersection. I'm sweating bullets and I book it over to where I plan on sleeping, hoping that if I'm driving fast enough, I'll lose this creep. My spot for the night was going to be a 24-hour gym. Lots of streetlights, people walking across the lot at all hours of the night. Seemed like the perfect place to sleep since the previous night I almost had a break-in while parked in a dark, empty area. I park and wait. I don't see anyone other than gym rats with duffel bags and water bottles in hand. I let my guard down and start getting ready for bed. Just as I am reaching into the front seat to grab my phone, I see this car and finally the driver of the car, a white male, peering into the windshield of my van. And he does see me, as my front window is the only window that isn't tinted. We lock eyes and I freak the heck out. He starts circling my van with his vehicle, so I pull out and find a parking spot right next to the front door of the gym, where he can't circle me anymore. Well, bucko, he doesn't give up. He just parks across from me, car still cranked, lights still on, facing me. I understand that I'm in danger and decide to call someone I know that lives in Charleston. Thankfully, they let me stay with them for the night, so once I got the okay to head over there, I drove out of the parking lot and drove as fast as I could to my friend's house. It was 30 minutes away and I was driving so fast that I don't even know if and for how long the guy was following me. Needless to say, hashtag van life is a lot more dangerous than the IG van dwellers would have you think. I felt duped and eventually just got an apartment. I feel a lot safer, and even though I would still like to travel, I intend to stay at an RV park the next go around. As far as the stalker that I encountered, how about let's not meet again, shall we? I've never posted on here since I never had a reason, but here I am. Late last night, I was browsing for jobs on Indeed and found this auto detailing job. I applied and didn't think anything of it. Just about 30 minutes ago, I received a call from an unknown number and I answered it. This was the guy from the auto detailing place. The call started off normal. I didn't think anything of it. But I noticed how he just kept talking and talking. And usually when somebody wants to give you an interview for a position, they get straight to the point. He began to tell me about the things they do on a regular day of work. He said they were these so-called vans that they would ride to the client's house to detail their car. And keep this in mind. He started to ask me questions such as, "Are you in school?" Which I replied to him, "I'm not. I graduated high school a couple years ago and have been looking into college, but I'm not sure about it." He started asking me questions that made me uncomfortable. He asked where my parents worked, and the second that I said my dad works for the government, I could feel the awkwardness in his voice. Straight then, I knew something was up. He was saying that he almost feels bad for me because I'm 19, living with my parents because they have good jobs, and I haven't had the chance to flourish. That started to piss me off. I was just on the phone with him at this point to see what kind of scamming job this was. Finally, he asked me if I wanted to come in for an interview. Again, just doing this to see what he was up to, not actually going. I said yes and eventually asked what the address to the place was. This is where things get messed up. He said, "Well, today you won't have to meet us at the office." So obviously I asked him where I was supposed to meet him for this interview. He said, "I want to show you around the van today and meet the manager." Hold up. You want me to have an interview at an unspecified location in a van? He told me to meet the manager at some random McDonald's, and that there would be a white van with auto detailing written on the truck. Doesn't sound sketchy at all. I told him that I would meet his manager there, obviously not going to, and he wished me good luck. I don't know what kind of shady stuff he was pulling, but I am super uncomfortable. Even in the interview he said, "I know it sounds sketchy, but it's not." Obviously, like I said, I didn't end up actually going, but I really hope that nobody else fell for this scammy job posting. I've had my fair share of creepy people throughout my life. Bucharest is a city where things like this rarely happened, so just take it from me, I had bad luck. First of all, let me just say that I'm not your average scaredy cat dude who legs it when someone stares at them for too long, like I've seen some posters here do. I'm also not gonna hide under my bed if my house gets broken into. You better believe I'll stomp their butts with no regards for my own safety. Putting being a keyboard warrior aside, there have been a few moments that I've had with total strangers that have been scarring, genuinely terrifying moments. I'm going to be talking about the most messed up situation that I have ever been in my life, and hope to any god out there that it never happens again. The incident happened 4 years ago before New Year's Eve. I was 18 at the time, and I had finished high school in the summer, and with no activity and nothing else to do, I decided to look for something I could do part-time with my limited skill sets and talents. The only things that I was remotely good at was playing video games and boxing. My mom found out this casting job in a newspaper article, back when she didn't know how to browse the internet, and she called and set up a meeting without really talking to me about it. I decided to play along since I was searching for something anyway, and casting in some shows seemed like an awesome choice. I'm 6'1" and I was skinny at the time, so I figured they could make me wear stuff like a clothing model. Needless to say, my naivety got the best of me, and I didn't realize things did not work that way. I went to the casting studio and the place was a total wreck. It was in some rundown building at the edge of the city. No windows, the bricks in the wall were cracked, and the withering vegetation was getting a hold of the place. It was also strange that there were no people around, but I figured this is the city's edge and all, then it should be a normal sight. I realized that there was no front door, so I went down some stairway on the far end of the building, which led me to a rotted wooden door. There was no handle or anything, so I didn't even know if I should push or try to pull it with the tip of my finger somehow. I decided that it must be the wrong place, so I called the number which my mom provided me with, and somebody answered. It was, well, she said that she was a woman, but I thought she was a man at first. She had a very low-pitched voice. She was very sweet and patient with me, and told me that this is indeed the building that I should go into. That I should try to hold the door and push it up a bit, and then pull it towards me slowly so it wouldn't break from the hinges. And not to be afraid when I come inside because it's going to be pitch black. Apparently there's no electricity in that area, so I would just need to go forward until I feel another door. And that'll take me to another hallway which is completely lit up and take me to their office. Now hold up. What kind of insane person do you think I am to do this? I watched way too many horror movies to know this is all kinds of bad. The lady on the other side gave me a brief explanation on why the office was like this. Apparently, this was an apartment complex built in the 60s, but it got really wrecked after the '77 earthquake, which killed quite a few people because some of the pillars on the second floor were unstable beforehand. So they had to close it and no one's really done anything with it since. Since this casting company's budget was really low, they couldn't afford to have a nice looking office and to be in a good looking place, or at least a safe one. If you're having trouble with logic here, they were her words and not mine. One thing that I found sketchy is that somewhere in this conversation, she said, "You're alone, yeah?" I thought it was a bit strange, as if she could see me somehow. Her story seemed legit though. I closed the call, opened the rotting door, and sure enough, darkness. I should point out that when I pulled the door to me, there was a chair in front of it, probably to block it from collapsing inward as it apparently swung both ways because of its state of decay. I activated my phone flashlight to look around and it was really empty. Just a few chairs in the corner, and a white ragged and dirty looking tarp on the ground next to them. The door in the front had the same aspect of rotting wood. I figured that they would at least renovate that one to make it look more appealing. I pushed the door gently and it opens with a very loud creak. I think I should have pulled it. But this one didn't have a handle as well. Everything was still dark. I started questioning the system that they use and the fact that they're not professional. The lady told me that this hallway would be lit up, yet it wasn't. With my phone flashlight still on, I scanned the room for clues as to where the office might be. I know how this must seem to you listening to this. How did I not pick up on this incredibly sketchy situation? I'm just used to this. In the past, me and my parents didn't have light sources in our backyard, so whenever I needed to get something from the pantry, which also did not have a light source, I would do so in total darkness. This whole thing was getting on my nerves, so I deactivated my flashlight and decided to call the phone number again. As soon as I put my phone on my ear and the light it emitted went out, I heard a loud creak behind me, the sound of the rotting door that I pushed out earlier getting put back into place. I jumped at the sound and let out a sharp yell. I instinctively put my phone out, but the light the dial screen was letting out was too weak to see in front of me. "Hello?" I asked in a worried voice. No response. But in a second, I could hear the dial tone from my phone and hear a Nokia ringtone, the piano one, from the other side of the room where the door had been closed. I stay silent for a moment and the ringing stops. I have never been more horrified in my life. I crouched down and started moving along the wall to my left, as quickly and quietly as possible. I hear very quiet footsteps coming from my right, but I couldn't tell if they were coming toward me. I formulated a very basic escape plan in an instant. I had a general idea of where the door was, and the footsteps seemed to be directionless. I took 2 coins of 50 bani out of my back pocket and threw them at the other side of the room, and then I booked it. I pushed on the edge of the door at first because I ran away way too fast and had no idea where the door was exactly, and then I pushed against it to get out of the room. I tripped because I expected no resistance, yet a chair was blocking the other side. I heard scampered footsteps behind me and slight grunts. I get up and run away in the dark room with no regards to what I may hit on my path. I just knew the exit would be right in front of me. Sure enough, I hit another chair on the way, the one that I found blocking the door at the entrance, and it propelled me so hard that I bashed the door and knocked it off its hinges. I opened my eyes and I was outside, so my first instinct was screaming for help at the top of my lungs. I looked at the building and finally see him. A tall, overweight man, probably around 300 pounds, carrying a cloth in one of his hands. He was wearing a white tank top and jeans or sweatpants. I really couldn't be bothered to notice at the time. The expression on his face was one of pure anger. I scampered about and ran up the stairs as quickly as I could, and then turned right to go into town. I ran for about 3 or 4 minutes at full speed, not stopping for anything, until I finally reached the main street and I saw a lot of cars again. I was still in a panic state, so I beelined it for the nearest taxi and told him to take me the heck home. I called my mom when I was halfway home and told her everything that just happened. She felt sick to her stomach and started crying that she put me in a situation that I might have died. Later that day, I filed a report to our nearest police station and they sent a dispatch there. We were informed that they found traces of a few blunts which had cannabis sativa and a double-edged razor on the ground. They also found a broken Nokia flip phone in the dirt outside. My parents told the police that if they found out anything else, to please contact them. This has left me with some serious issues, as I know I feel very anxious whenever I go to a job interview. I only feel relatively safe if the location is in a very public place, and the interview is at rush hour. One man did this to me. So kids, stay safe and remember, your martial arts training doesn't mean crap when you're scared out of your mind. I applied on a job website recently for a serving position at a restaurant. I was contacted by someone through the messaging option through the site. The place was a Burmese restaurant. I ended up Googling the address and found out where it was. The next day, the person messaging me told me an address that didn't show up on Google. I thought it was odd, but oh well. Today, the interview was at 9 a.m. The restaurant being open this early was surprising to me. I used Google Maps and to find the location. I am always early, and I'm glad that I was. The location was not even open for business. The paper on the door said the restaurant is opening in April, and it had a completely different name than the ad had stated. I looked inside and the building looked abandoned and very dilapidated. Okay, pretty weird. I stand off to the side to scope things out because I'm having a very bad feeling that this may be some setup trap to lure a person or a girl like me into a place for an attack. And then I notice a man who looks to be high on a stimulant, wearing nice clothing, watching me. He smiles and laughs and then does this bird whistle and goes to the side of the restaurant. A few minutes later, a man in an Audi SUV shows up, looks at me, starts laughing and meets up with the first guy. They are both around the side and I start wondering if there is a door to get in that way that I didn't know about. I start hearing the men bird whistling, and to my terror, I hear multiple other bird whistles coming from all around the block. However, I see no one. How many people are out there? Why are they hiding in the bushes? I get freaked out. I was going to tell the interviewer to do the interview outside because if I get locked in there, I know that I'm stuck. I ended up trusting my intuition and getting the heck out of there. Nothing bad happened, luckily, because I decided to trust my gut. I feel like society tries to get women to think they're being paranoid in this kind of situation. Then, if something horrible happens, people say, "Gee, she should have been more careful. What was she thinking?" I just wanted to share. I am unsure what to do because nothing happened. I don't really know how to approach this without any technical evidence. I want to contact the job site or police to look into it, but I feel like they won't care. Let me know if you guys have any other ideas. This happened to me in 2016, but I was having trouble sleeping tonight, and my brain dredged this up from my memories. I had recently moved back to my college town so I could rent an apartment with a friend after a long-term relationship had ended. I was doing a lot of job hunting for pretty much anything, as I was pretty desperate for income and unsuccessful with finding work within my career field. I was using multiple job sites, but mostly Indeed, because I liked their website features that helped you track which jobs you applied for and their status. There were, of course, some jobs that I applied for on their own websites, but I kept track. After a couple of weeks of searching, I get a call. I don't recognize the number and the area code wasn't familiar, but I pick it up as it might be a job prospect. A woman is on the end and she says that she's calling to set up an interview as I had applied for their company. The company's name was not something that I remembered applying for. While on the phone with her, I quickly pulled up Indeed on my laptop and looked through all of the jobs that I had applied for. None matched. I have no idea what this job is, but don't make this apparent on the phone, as I've been job searching for weeks and I'm still unemployed. I asked her for the address of the building and I write it down. Looking back, I can't remember the name that she gave me, but what I do remember was how pushy she was into scheduling the interview for later that evening. I agree to the interview, and I thank her, but as I hang up, I get a very bad feeling. Something doesn't seem right, so I Google the phone number, and it's not linked to a company. I Google the address, and it's also not affiliated with a company. It's from way outside the distance of jobs that I was applying for, almost an hour away from where I live. I pull up Google Street View, and all I can see for the address that she gave me is several smaller rundown buildings with a highway exit in the distance. It looked desolate. I pictured myself driving there around dusk when she scheduled the interview, and I could physically feel this sensation of dread settle in me. I didn't want to go. I brought all of this up to my roomie at the time, and he said that I might be overthinking it, but if I wasn't comfortable with it, to not go. I'm so glad that I didn't go. The more time passes, the more I'm aware of just how shady it was. In hindsight, I wish that I had gone to the police, but I didn't at the time because the year prior, I hadn't had much faith in them. I had tried to get a restraining order for an ex who was telling me that he was going to hurt me, and he was harassing me from burner phone numbers. Who knows what could have happened if I had gone? It's a scary thought, really. I started working third shift, your standard at 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., at a convenience store about a year ago, and this store was in a nice area of my town. Unfortunately, however, it was also nearby a bar, a hospital, and was right off the interstate. We would often get customers who were drunk and or high. Every night that I worked, I would get some kind of comment on my appearance from at least one man. I was 19 years old, and I'm very petite. Some were pretty genuine and sweet and complimentary. Some were asking me if I was old enough to sell beer, and said that I looked like a child. Many comments, however, given the type of customers who come in at those hours, were sexual. I had a lot of men asking for my number, checking me out, making comments about my body parts, etc. It had a tendency to be a little off-putting, and some went too far, but I felt safe. I had 2 coworkers on my shift. 2 of us would work at a time, and both were male. One was a very tall and a big guy, and the other had a lot of muscle on him and was our shift manager. Both were very strong and cared deeply about me. I felt safe. 2 customers in particular stand out to me that made me feel really uncomfortable and even afraid. At about 2 a.m. during a shift, we had a 30 to 40-year-old man show up and loiter around front for a while and convince a younger man to purchase a Black and Mild for him. This was pretty commonplace and nothing that I hadn't seen before. Even somebody down on their luck needs their nicotine fix. While he was standing next to the guy purchasing the cigar for him, he made some comment about me being attractive and calling me Snowflake and Snow Bunny a few times. I remember exchanging an amused look with the younger man because it was so strange and honestly pretty funny. I noticed our loiterer was carrying some paper and a pencil. He asked me if he could draw a picture of me, and I said yes. It seemed innocent enough, and I could never stand to hurt somebody's feelings. He told me to wait, said a few more strange things, and babbling about sports to my manager, and telling me that I looked like Britney Spears. I don't at all. And then went outside to smoke his Black and Mild. This man came back inside and spent nearly an hour staring at me and drawing dutifully. He made quite a few inappropriate comments, and I quietly told my manager that I was uncomfortable. He requested that he leave since he isn't purchasing anything and he was there so long. My manager was a sweetheart of a guy. He offered him free coffee if he would leave. He didn't want to be too rude. Our artist spent another 30 minutes during a coffee and stopping to draw every couple of minutes. My manager repeated himself, saying that he needs to leave. The man proceeded to show me a crude, very scribbly and childlike drawing of a person with boobs and bunny ears and said that it was me. I ended up telling him that I was disgusted and that if he didn't leave the property immediately, I'd call the police. He tried to stick around, but I held my ground and told him again. He left and we didn't have to call. The police showed up later on asking if we had seen a man with a hospital band on, acting erratically. Apparently, he was a psychiatric patient at the hospital, and had similarly been artistically harassing a grocery store employee down the road. And by the time that he got to us, he had apparently taken the band off. The whole situation was so deeply uncomfortable for me. The erratic behavior, the harassment, and the hungry look in his eyes. I truly do hope that he's doing better and no longer harassing women, but I certainly wouldn't like to find out for myself. The next story is a little bit shorter, but I feel this man could have been a more serious threat to me. I had a customer come in once, an older gentleman. He made sexual comments about me and showed me pictures of his multiple girlfriends who, allegedly, also have sex with each other. He asked me if I would like to join, and I politely and awkwardly laughed and declined. He stuck around for a little too long, but my coworker was there and I felt fine. The next few nights he returned. However, this time he somehow happened to come in only when my other coworker was either out back taking a smoke break or pulling trash at the pumps. I told him that I wasn't interested, but every night he still told me that he'd like to bend you over the counter right now or take you out back right now. He made several comments that sounded like threats to me, considering that I had expressed my disinterest many times and that I was taken. Based on demeanor and body language, I could tell that he knew I was afraid of him, and he seemed to enjoy it. It terrified me. All the while, the only person who could protect me was outside. He always left before my coworker came back in, and so I couldn't ever point him out. Our cameras outside were not nearly good enough to catch a license plate. We had no panic button or anything of the sort. I came to realize that he had to have been stalking the store to wait for a moment that I was alone. Eventually, he came in while a coworker was with me, and he banned him from the store. I regret not reporting him to the police, but I had no name or, like I said, any type of security footage clear enough to make out a face or a license plate. Some quick backstory. I work at a gas station on a main route, and we see a lot of travelers passing through. Only one person works each shift, and it's a 24-hour store. We are short-staffed, so I agreed to work an overnight. I'm female. I work in a state that's always had self-serve gas stations. So this guy comes in. I asked him if he needed any help, and he says no. He's getting gas at the pump but needs to use the bathroom. I go back to work on whatever invoices that we got yesterday. The guy uses the bathroom and then goes back outside. About 5 to 7 minutes later, he comes back inside and tells me that he's confused about the pump. He directly says, "You might have to come outside to help me." Customers don't often say this. They usually just complain that it's not working, so I'm already feeling weird about this guy. I shake it off because he looks like a nerd, and I don't feel afraid of him really. I look at the register to see what error came up with for his pump, and there are no errors. The register doesn't even say that it was in use. Even if somebody tries to pay and nothing's wrong with their payment, it will at least say, "Payment loyalty timed out." But literally it had no sign of him trying to use it before asking me for help. I ask him if he just wants to pay inside, and he agrees to. He gets his wallet out of his car and then pays $10. I give him his receipt and he says, "Can you help me? I don't understand the machine." And I say, "We aren't really allowed to leave the store during overnight shifts, and it's just me here, and it's not safe to go outside." I don't know why I told him that I was alone, but he wasn't seeming threatening. He proceeds to say, "I don't understand what it's asking me. I need help. I'm not scary." I tell him again that I can't go outside because it's a store policy for the overnight shift, and I say, "It's not that you're scary. I just can't go outside." Even if it was a little old lady asking for help at this hour, I'd have to tell her the same thing. Which is true. We can't even take out the trash during overnights. He starts to walk away from the register counter now, but then again stops at the door and asks me one last time if I would come outside and help him. I'm pretty annoyed at this point, and I've said no twice now. I'm not going, so stop asking. I finally say in a super annoyed tone, Okay, all you need to do is 1. Pick up the nozzle, 2. Select your fuel grade button, and 3. Put it into your tank and squeeze the handle. I'm not going outside. And then he finally goes back to the car, and the register tells me that he had no trouble pumping gas. And his plate seems like they're from the state that I work in. This kind of thing wouldn't make me suspicious usually, but the fact that he had originally opted for me to go outside instead of bringing money inside at 3 a.m. is weird. Along with how he didn't bother to use the pump before he came inside to ask for help, claiming that it wasn't working, and him not taking my first no for an answer. No means no. Luckily, after all of this, he left, so I didn't have to deal with him again. This happened just last night, and honestly I'm still a little shaken up over it. I'll try to retell the tale exactly as it happened, but my fear is sure to have fudged up my memory a bit. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized Midwestern city. I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I had stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of any other customers. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was not usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged black woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night and it had just started raining. The woman was not wearing weather-appropriate clothing, so she was drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached to see what sort of help I could offer. "Hey beautiful, I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me," she said. "I'm trying to get to City A, but the cab ride is $60, and I only have $40. Can you help me?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible and my job centers around helping people, so I agreed. I told her that I didn't have any cash, but if she would come with me inside, I would take some money out of the ATM and give her some of it. But the ATM wasn't working. I apologized and told her that there was nothing else that I could do for her. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver's door to get in. And then she got in my car. I was too shocked to really say anything. I sat staring at her as she buckled herself into the passenger seat. And as soon as she had gotten into my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed forlorn as much as she did extremely excited and restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house," she said. "She can give me money." Of course, alarm bells are going off in my head. Although my first instinct is to tell her to get the heck out of my car, my gut tells me that would be dangerous. She had already proven to be unpredictable. She seemed to be high, and I didn't know if she had any weapons on her. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought, had the potential to elicit a violent reaction. "Where are you asking me to take you?" I finally said. "Just start driving and I'll tell you where to turn." "No, if you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need you to tell me where we're going." I say with no real intention of driving her anywhere. "Don't worry, honey. I'm not one of the bad ones. I'm not going to rob you or nothing. Just drive." "No," I repeated. "What's your aunt's address?" "Okay, it's on Street A." "Well, what's the house number?" As I was asking her questions, she got really agitated. We still hadn't left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of the car and going into the gas station for help, but A, she had seemed to know and was friendly with one of the attendants that was inside when I tried to get money, and B, I wasn't about to leave her in my car alone. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. You don't trust me." "I work at a police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these sort of questions." And she flipped the heck out. She started yelling at me about being a snitch, about trying to get her into trouble, just in general losing her mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just wanted her gone. But my instincts told me that asking her to get out of my car wouldn't work. So I decided to take a risk. "I'm not a police officer. I just work at the police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have an ATM that works?" My idea was to get her out of the car as peacefully as possible, and then lose her in the store. She liked my idea and immediately calmed down. I knew that driving off with this woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like my best option at the time. As we're driving, she keeps talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seemed difficult for her to follow through on one thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. "Hey, I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so we can go arrest them together." "Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow. And tonight you said you're trying to get home." "Yes, honey, I'm trying to get to City B." "City B? I thought you said you needed to go to City A." Yeah, City A is what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40. It's far away." "The cab ride is $40. "Yeah, baby. You said that you have 40. "I do, baby. I have 40, but the cab ride is 60. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close by on Street B." "I thought you said that you lived on Street A." "No, baby, I meant Street B. But it don't matter because she won't give me money anyway. You sure you just can't take me to City A?" It was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was utterly full of crap, because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, only after I got out first, and followed me into the store. I told her that before we went to find an ATM, I needed to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside a stall, but she followed me into the bathroom, and that's when things got really weird. She grabbed the crook of my arm and whispered into my ear, "If you don't got no money to give me, that's okay. But let me ask you something, sweetie. Do you like getting ate?" I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, bolted into a stall and locked the door as fast as I possibly could manage. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends at the police department that can probably help you better than I can. I'm just gonna call them and we can figure this out together." Again, as I mentioned the cops, she started screaming at me. I just kept reiterating that the police would help her. She snapped at me that she was just going to leave and stormed out of the bathroom, but it wasn't over. I waited to make sure that she was really gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came into the bathroom and started banging on the stall door. And she said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly tell her that no. I saw her get into my car and she had absolutely nothing with her, other than the clothes on her back. After that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one that I work in, because I was mortified at how entirely stupid I had been the whole night, and would have died of embarrassment if any of my coworkers had responded. The officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a report of a woman who matched my description, assaulting a good Samaritan that had stopped to try to help her. I definitely learned a lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad my stupidity didn't kill me. This is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and what makes it worse is that, had things gone down differently, I might not have been here to tell the story. Okay, first things first. I'm a girl about 5'7" and around 130 pounds. This happened to me about 3 years ago, when I was in my early 20s and still a student living in a very safe area. Growing up, I had loved martial arts, and having grown up in a small rural town, I would take what I could get. Karate, fine. Judo, sure. Kung Fu, why not? Taekwondo, sign me up. I loved martial arts and I still do, because they help me discipline my body and mind, and grow my confidence. It had been a few years since I had moved out to my country's capital to study, and I had kind of fallen off the martial arts wagon at that point, with college taking up most of my time. I should also mention that at the time I lived with my younger brother and our cat. We lived on the first floor, the second floor for all my American people, right next to a military camp in a patch of forest which leads to a creek. On our back balcony, there was a circular metal ladder that would lead up to our balcony, and the kitchen door, which of course we always kept under lock and key. Except for when my cat wanted to go out. Then we would unlock the door, and he would go down the outdoor metal stairs to find his cat friends and play. I commuted to my college every day by walking 30 minutes to a bus stop, and then riding the bus for an hour and then walking another 10 minutes until I made it to campus. And when it was time to go home, I would have to do the same thing all over again. So, as you can imagine, it was very tiring. I would be out of the house every day from 10 in the morning until almost 10 at night, so when I'd come home, I'd be knackered. I don't believe in premonitions much, but I do believe in instinct, and for quite a while, I felt like something was up with that patch of forest behind our apartment. I felt watched. Maybe it was the blackness of that patch of forest that made me feel uneasy, because there wasn't a single light there, and the outdoor ladder looked like it descended into an abyss. You could take 3 steps into that patch of forest and you would be under complete cover of darkness. It made me feel weird, because even though I couldn't see anything, I knew that something was up. I had no proof, but I knew it. I was in class one Wednesday afternoon with my best friend at the time, and a professor came in to pitch an internship to us. Internships aren't very well known in my country, so professors actually have to argue their case about why, as students, we could benefit from this. My best friend, I'll call her Kay, was very interested. But when the professor listed off the requirements, she realized that she couldn't apply, as her GPA wasn't high enough. This led to Kay having a crying fit after the class was over, which led to a panic attack. And it got so bad that she called her boyfriend to come pick her up from campus. And since I didn't want to leave her alone, I stayed with her until her boyfriend showed up and got in his car with her. The conversation in the car was basically me and her boyfriend trying to console her and help cheer her up. I asked her if she would like me to go over to her place so we could all hang out, but she said that she was okay and didn't want to put me through the hassle of commuting home the next day. She lives a full hour away by car, so 2 hours away by public transport. So it was decided that they would drop me off at my house and they would go to theirs. When we get to my house around 7 p.m., a full 3 hours before I normally come home, I hug her, tell her to text me if she needs anything. I thank her boyfriend, and get out of the car, glad that I'll be home early for a change. I went in through the main entrance, climbed up the stairs to the first floor and put my key in the lock. I opened the door and called out my brother's name, like I always did, but I got no response. The house was dark except for one light in the room where the front door had opened to it, and it was eerily quiet. I felt my stomach tie into a knot because even if I couldn't hear anything, I could feel that someone was there. And when my instincts talk, I listen. I turned right into the hallway that leads into our rooms and saw my brother's door slam shut hard as soon as I got in the hallway. My brother's room was on the end of the hallway on the left, facing my own room, which is on the right of the hallway. My first thought was that my brother had taken a shower and forgotten to get a towel, so he made a run for it from the bathroom, which is next to my room, in embarrassment. But then I heard muffled whispers coming from his room. They sounded hushed and pressing. I still had no reason to be afraid, but I was on high alert, because I thought my brother and his friends were planning on jumping out of his room and scaring me, and I wasn't about to let them get the satisfaction. So I inched down the short hallway, through the darkness, and before I knock on my brother's door, I take a look at my room. It was a complete mess. My mattress was off the bed. My clothes and my books were all over the floor. My jewelry box was empty and thrown on my bed. All in all, it looked like a tornado had gone through there. And the hushed whispers in the next room sounded extremely pressing and anxious now that I was close. Because though I had tried to tiptoe as silently as possible, my steps had been audible. I realized what was happening, and I went ballistic. At that moment, I freaking lost it. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, and it kicked fight into maximum overdrive. The words danger, thieves, fight hit me like a truck, and I threw my whole weight on my brother's door, bursting that door down so furiously you would think that it owed me money. I saw no one in the room, but it was also a mess and I knew what I had heard, so I ran to the balcony door. I ripped the curtain out of my way and went through the open balcony door just in time to catch one of the thieves right after he had jumped off the balcony ledge. Looking back on it, he looked like a normal guy. Black hair, normal height, athletic build, big earring on his left ear. But at the time, he looked like a freaking monster to me. A vile, putrid, home-invading monster. I started screaming unintelligible things as I saw him stumble around, obviously having hurt his legs, before he got back on his feet and ran away. They were gone. I was safe, but then it hit me. Where the heck was my laptop? I ran into my room and tore the place apart looking for it. It was gone. I started screaming and crying. The unfairness, the audacity, and the cowardice hit me like a steel toe to the stomach. I screamed and cried like I was a Grecian tragedy. I am not rich by any means, and neither is my family. I had an old laptop which was probably worth pennies secondhand, but I needed the laptop for my schoolwork, and without it, I couldn't finish my semester. Not to mention that I don't have many real-life friends, and the majority of my friends at the time were online, so if I lost that laptop, I lost them too. My laptop was lost, and so was I. I felt violated, dirty, and less than. I was afraid that I would throw up or pass out or both. I was taking such rapid and deep panic breaths that my vision began to blur. In the most panicked and grief-stricken state I'd ever been in my life, tears streaming down my face. I called my mother to tell her what had happened, and she told me to call the police. It took me almost a full minute on the phone with the operator, telling her again and again where I lived, who I was, and what had happened, before she understood me and said that she would send someone over. A few days later, I was talking with my mother about the incident, and she told me something that hit me hard. I come from a pretty trilingual household, and she told me that when I called her that night, she couldn't make out what language I was speaking because I had been so panicked. It makes sense why I had to repeat myself over and over to the operator. I started running around the house like a lunatic, checking every door and every lock in a frenzy, until I got to the kitchen and saw that the window had been broken. Without thinking, I slammed it shut. Stupid, I know, but I was beside myself. I wasn't thinking straight. My brother came home a few minutes later, and when he came in, he saw me panicked, crying my eyes out, and speaking almost unintelligibly. He came to the bedrooms and he saw the damage, and told me to go sit in the living room and calm down. I did as he said, and I tried to calm down, but I jumped at every sound, and started crying worse, telling him that I was sorry that I got home too late, and that our laptops were gone. The dark house seemed so big to me at those moments, so lonely, so hostile, and I felt so small and helpless. My brother called me over to my room and showed me a pillowcase full of something. When we looked inside, we found both laptops, all of my jewelry, fake, all of it, my old phone and some other stuff. They had been right in front of me the whole time, but I was so messed up that I didn't even register it. The police eventually came about an hour later and did pretty much nothing, so my brother and I took it to the police station and filed a report of the incident. And since I had seen half of one of the culprit's faces, they asked me to come in for an identification. They even sent over someone to dust for fingerprints. Nothing ever came of it. The police said that since they didn't even have a backpack to put the loot in, and resorted to using one of our pillowcases, they were almost 100% junkies. We had the outdoor metallic ladder ripped off our kitchen balcony, much to my cat's displeasure, since that's how they got in. And we also installed several motion detecting lights. For the next few months, I was constantly on edge, and every time I passed near some suspicious characters who hang around near my usual bus stop, I felt a violent rage boil in me. I caught myself looking for the man that I had seen, ready to beat him within an inch of his life. But I never saw him again, or heard his creepy whisper partner again, and my brother and I moved away from that apartment a few months later, because I just never felt comfortable there again. I picked up kickboxing, and because it has made me stronger, it has helped me feel safer. And I also always carry a knife with me now. I still think back to that encounter and realize how stupid I was. What creeps me out the most is knowing that that night, there had been nothing but a thin plywood door separating me from two potentially dangerous men. Even if I know that me busting in my brother's room like a lunatic is what scared them off, because how stupidly fearless I was, I also realized how bad it could have gone. They could have had weapons, they could have had knives, they could have had pepper spray or a chain or whatever, and there were two of them and only one of me. And if they had ganged up on me, even with the adrenaline having turned me into Doom Guy, I don't know how much of a chance I realistically stood against two men, high on whatever they were on, and desperate enough to break into an apartment and stuff loot in a pillowcase. Had they been willing to put up a fight, this would have ended very, very bad for me. What I do know is that I probably still would have busted in there like Doom Guy. So, to the creepy, cowardly people who dared break into my apartment and tried to rob me and my brother and ended up traumatizing me so bad that I had to move, screw you both. I hope for your sake that we never meet again, because I've been kicking that sandbag for 2 years now and picturing your face every single time. So, this just happened to me like 15 minutes ago, and more than anything, I'm just embarrassed that I couldn't have just rolled it off my back and not gotten scared. I live in a fairly low-rent, shitty apartment complex since I'm in college, and that's what I can afford. Obviously, we're all social distancing because of the pandemic right now, but I really wanted to try to get just a bit more sunlight to help me keep my sanity from being home all day every day. And so, I went out of my apartment and sat on a bench near the bus stop just to sit for a little while. I put my earbuds in and called a friend. In my peripheral vision, I could see people standing outside their doors to have a cigarette, and a lady walking her dog, but we were all at very least 40 feet away from each other, so no one really seemed worried. A couple were talking outside their door, and for a moment, I thought they were looking at me. I figured that I was just being paranoid though until the woman started walking in my direction. As she was walking, I was keeping an eye on it, but trying to keep acting like I hadn't noticed. The bench that I was on was near the mailboxes for the whole complex and the bus stop. So I figured that there were plenty of reasons other than me so that she could be coming that way. That was until she stopped just right in front of me. I looked up and noticed that I had seen this woman once before on the bus. She wears a lot of very heavy, dramatic makeup, including drawn on a set of eyebrows just below the ones that she's already growing. She once started talking to me on my morning bus ride to school and gave me an itemized list of the things that she didn't like about my face. I just sort of smiled and nodded and then looked the other way the rest of the trip. It looked like maybe she was talking, so I pulled my earbuds out and hung up on my friend abruptly. "Sorry," I said. "Could you call the police for me?" she said. Okay," I said, picking up my phone. "Actually, never mind," she said quickly, and she looked nervous. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, could I have $1?" I told her that I didn't have any change and I apologized. "Oh, okay. Actually, could you call the police for me?" "Yes," I said again, unlocking my phone. "Wait, actually, it's fine," she said, now smiling at me. Now, when she said it the first time, my brain at first thought, she's not visibly injured. Maybe she's in trouble. Had she been fighting with that man that I saw her with before? Was she in danger? Was she being so casual with me because she needed help, but didn't want to alert someone that she was trying to get it? I looked her in the eyes and said, "Are you sure? I really can call someone if you need it." She said, "No, it's fine." Now, some important context about me is that I have some history of trauma. I don't really want to elaborate too much, but the short of it is that I'm left with a lot of fear of people touching me or violating my personal space. Because some things from when I was growing up, my body now has basically the worst response when someone violates my boundaries, which is to go very limp, and let the other person do whatever they want to me in the hopes that if I don't struggle, they won't hurt me as much. It's basically the worst response that I could have, but it's very hard to reprogram my body. Due to my mental health issues, I've also spent significant periods of my life in psychiatric hospitals for treatment. I've met a lot of people with different issues in the hospital, so I have a bit of a sense for when someone might not be all there mentally. The longer that I talked to this woman, the more of a sense I got that she was perhaps not totally in her right mind. Now, I'm in the hospital and I've had similar experiences where someone who wasn't fully lucid cornered me and got trapped in a potentially not safe situation. This was all made worse by my inability to A, get people to just leave me alone, and B, protect my physical space when my body's been triggered into fight or flight. In the hospital when this happens, the hope is that staff will notice and help me get away, with mixed results as a lot of things go on in hospitals that staff end up either unaware of or not noticing until it's too late, but that's a different story. So, at that moment, my body decided it was time to screw me over. I started to realize that this woman was getting closer and closer to me, and probably not totally well in the head. My body started pumping adrenaline, which made my hands and legs start to feel weak. I felt like I couldn't get enough breath, and my head started to go a little fuzzy. The woman positioned herself to sit down next to me, and I started to try to get up. "Hey, do you want to walk to the store with me?" she said. I stood up. "Oh, sorry, I can't. I have to take my friend to, somewhere." I realized that I couldn't think of a lie fast enough. My brain wasn't cooperating. "He's been texting me all day and, sorry." "Okay," she said, now standing next to me. I started to walk from the bench back over to my building. My legs were feeling pretty wobbly, but I tried to walk as casually as possible. Behind me, I could hear her following. She wasn't moving too fast. I thought maybe she thought that I wouldn't notice, but still, I tried not to seem scared. Not that my legs would have been able to run away anyway. I got into my building about 60 seconds before her, and she was still definitely following. I kept thinking, I just need to get into my apartment and lock the door before she sees which one is mine. My apartment is on the second floor, but it's a short flight of stairs and you can see my apartment door from the bottom, where the main door to the building is. I tried to run up them, but my head was swimming and my legs weren't cooperating. It's like that feeling when you're half awake and you try to move your limbs and they sort of do what you tell them to, but not really. Like they feel sort of far away from you and only semi out of control. I made it up to the stores and luckily, I had left my door unlocked. I got in and closed it behind me, just as I heard her opening the main door to the building below me. I locked all 3 locks on my door and went over to the window to see if I could see her. She wasn't visible from the window, which meant she was still in my building. I texted my dad and asked if he thought that I still ought to call the police. He said that I should. I went into my bedroom and called 911. Now, the windows of my bedroom show the other side of the building and the back door. The operator asked for a description and if I knew where she was now, and I told her I couldn't see her out my front window, so I thought that she was still in the building. And then suddenly, I saw her walk out and stand just below my window. The 911 operator said that she would send a few officers and to call them back if she left. I backed away from the window a bit. I was worried that she had seen me looking at her and then know which unit I was in. She looked around for a bit and then just slowly started wandering away towards a different building. Within about 5 minutes, 3 cop cars, it must have been a slow day, rolled in and stopped behind my apartment. They noticed her standing over by the other building, looking like she might try to talk to the woman walking her dog. 2 of the officers parted and went to talk to her while the 3rd drove off. I watched as they talked to her for a while and then eventually the man that I had seen her talking to at the start came out of a different building than they had been standing in front of before and seemed to coax her in. The officers let her go and talked to the woman with the dog for a moment, and then they drove away. I think probably they decided she has mental health issues but wasn't actively a threat to anyone, so they let her be, which is okay by me. I know that some people deal with chronic issues and can be a little alarming to the people in their community, but most of the time, they don't actually pose much of a threat. Now I'm just sitting here feeling like an overdramatic fool and waiting to regain full control of my limbs and for my heart rate to go down. So, I want to start off by saying that I still work for this company, and I still have anxiety every time I go into work. The company is huge, one of the biggest names in the world. For privacy purposes, I'm going to call it the Big Cheese or Big C. I also want to mention that I have crippling social anxiety. I credit to being homeschooled most of my life. This will make more sense later. Well, September of last year I was fresh out of high school and looking for work. I needed this job immediately because I was living with my significant other, and we were barely getting by. My father and my grandfather both either work or worked for this company for a long period of time, and it is something that garnered a lot of respect in my family. So of course, I was thrilled when I got my first interview. It went great and I was all set to start training, which involved a few classes and on-the-job training. The classes were awkward to say the least, but nonetheless informative. Well, after the classes, we had our first task: join a group of fellow trainees and tour the work environment. This was when I first met the creepy coworker. He was in the very back of my group, seemed a little shy and didn't really talk to the rest of the group, unless he was trying to make an awkward joke to join in. At first, I just kind of felt bad for him. He seemed harmless, but definitely awkward and out of the loop. Knowing as much as I did going into the company, I made the effort to inform him and keep him updated with what the trainers were asking of us. He just seemed so lost and confused. I thought I was doing a good thing by helping him out. Even my significant other thought so at the time. The training went by without any hiccups, and soon we were given the location of where we would start out. Ironically enough, the only person that I'd gotten to know, the creepy coworker, had the same area that I did. Realizing that we would start out together and both didn't know anyone, we decided to exchange phone numbers. This was so that we could both meet up the next week, the starting day, so we wouldn't get lost. I thought nothing of this when he asked for my number, and just assumed it was more because he was nervous and didn't know anyone beside me. Boy, did I live to regret that. The first day of training, we met up at basically a flagpole so that we could wait for our on-the-job trainer, Christy. When we got off the employee shuttle, he started texting me asking where I was. I was in the smoking section a little ways away, killing my fears with a cigarette. I texted back telling him where I was and he asked if he could join. I didn't like how nervous I felt, so I wasn't very comfortable with anyone joining me during this time of reprieve. But I saw him coming over anyways, so I scooted over to make room on the bench. This didn't matter, because apparently he was going to sit as close as possible to me anyways. I hate touch or people being in my personal bubble, being a victim of other trauma. Touch was something only people very close to me had permission to do. A creepy coworker then proceeded to ask me if he could bum a cigarette, and I'm not good at saying no, so I gave him one. After he lit up, he handed me my lighter, that I didn't even notice he took from the top of my bag back to me. Again, I just kind of ignored the unwarranted invasion of my space. We talked since we had about 30 minutes to kill. We talked about the normal stuff like, how do you feel about the company? Where do you want to end up in it? I noticed that he was wearing tattoo covering sleeves, and so I asked him about his tattoos. He pulled down the sleeves and started going over almost each and every one. All had something to do with either a love interest or something geeky. I listened out of mild curiosity, but quickly got uncomfortable when he started pulling out his phone to show me pictures of ones that he drew. I was uncomfortable because he kept showing me pictures of himself as well. Mostly pictures of him shirtless, and I didn't really find that appropriate. He mentioned he was a Marine and that he had gained too much weight after his last tour. I apologized out of sympathy but suggested that it was nothing to be ashamed of. Unfortunately, after that, he kept smiling at me in a way I deemed to be admiration. I had seen this look from my fiancé, so I knew somewhere I had effed up. I quickly turned the conversation to more appropriate stuff like music taste. He seemed interested in what music I liked a little too much, and decided that he should make me a playlist. I said it really wasn't necessary, but he insisted. Later into that very day during training, he kept purposely doing kind things, like taking heavy boxes from my hands, or taking the odd jobs he deemed too grueling for a lady. I was a little annoyed, but mostly just glad most of the jobs meant that he would have to go to a different area and give me some space. He would always find a way back to appear beside me and scare me. I hate being scared, and he laughed it off every time. I was more than uncomfortable at this point, and a nervousness had settled in the pit of my stomach. At the end of the night, after we had been sent to go home and come back the next day, he decided to walk me out. We would walk back through the maze my workplace actually is, all the way to the employee costume center or lockers. It was there that we had gotten our work costumes and stored our regular clothing in lockers. Well, I was having trouble remembering the combination, and couldn't find the little slip of paper that told me it. A creepy coworker came up and smirked at me, seemingly waiting for me to finish up. I thought that he had left by this point, so I wasn't expecting him to show up. After a few tries, he reached over and put the combination on my lock in for me. This was a serious red flag for me. He had already memorized my combination, and now I felt as though my privacy was completely gone. Again, I'm awkward and unsure of what to do in any situation like this, so I thanked him but suggested that he let me figure it out next time. I was hoping he would, so that he would forget my combination. Remember this for later. After changing back into my regular clothes in the girls' locker room, I came out and he was still waiting for me. I asked him why he had waited when he could have just gotten home sooner, to which he replied, "Because I'm a gentleman and a lady should be walked to her car so she can be kept safe." I told him that my significant other was waiting to pick me up, He asked where and I told him, down the street like an idiot. I still don't know why I complied with this creep as much as I did, but I had never been in a situation like this one. He told me that it was too far for me to walk and that it wasn't safe, so he offered to drive me over to my significant other's car. Due to how tired I was and how much I ached from the day, I didn't have much strength to argue. I mean, he was creepy, but nice. I chalked up the creepiness to him just being awkward. So, without anything else weird happening, he took me to my significant other, whom I had been texting the entire time, just to let him know where I was and what was going on. I had a deep gut feeling that I should text him everything I knew about the guy, and so I did. When we pulled up, I immediately got out of the car. My boyfriend sat there leaning against the car with his arms crossed. He wasn't very happy about him giving me a ride, but nonetheless thanked the creepy coworker for getting me over to him safely. The coworker nodded, seeming to smirk at my boyfriend the whole time. This is when my boyfriend first got a bad feeling about this guy. So, when we got home and my boyfriend warned me about the guy, telling me that he wasn't getting a good vibe from the creepy coworker. It was not even 3 minutes after that, I got a text from the coworker. He started sending me songs and memes and telling me things like, "I really feel like you get me." Now, I was deeply concerned. What the hell did I get myself into? And why did I have to be so dang nice to people? The following day at work, I was on the last day of training, and I had a massive panic attack. I have a chronic illness, and the situation ended with none of my managers listening to me when I told them that the pain doesn't last and it comes and goes. They proceeded to rush me to the emergency room. Of course, the customers were quick to take out their phones and film the whole thing. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, but what happens next is worse. I received about 20 text messages from the creepy coworker asking me how I was. At this point, I was done and I just didn't respond. After a few random memes, he started texting me that he was drunk and thinking about not going home to his wife. This was the first time he had ever mentioned to me he even had a wife. I was dumbfounded. Why was he so concerned about me when he had someone he obviously loved enough to marry? I didn't respond and I went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to my boyfriend looking at my phone in anger. My heart sank and I can only imagine what creepy coworker had sent now. My boyfriend showed me the only text I had gotten since the night before. It was from his wife texting me from his phone. She wrote me a message explaining that creepy coworker had a problem getting attached to women. She warned me that I should stay away from him, and then told me her name. My name. It was after that she had explained my name was a thing for him. Of all of his exes had the same name. Now at this point, my boyfriend was telling me not to go back to this job, that it wasn't worth it. But that's not me. I wasn't going to let this one creep ruin this opportunity for me. This job meant the world to me, and I never wanted to let it go. So I told him if this continues that I would go to HR. But in all honesty, I didn't really want to go to HR. I was the new girl. I didn't want the first month on the job to be me fighting a harassment case. Biting my nails the whole way I went to work. Suddenly, creepy coworker wasn't hovering anymore. I thought this might have been him being embarrassed. I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to have a problem after that. Big mistake. On my lunch break, he made sure to go on his lunch early and come find me. His normally enthusiastic attitude was gone, replaced by what felt like anger. I was scared. He came up to me and let me know that his wife was full of crap and just angry because he was divorcing her. At this point, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I kept quiet, hoping that he would take the hint. Nope. He told me he had a gift for me and that he would give it to me after the shift, quickly walking away before I could respond. After my shift, I go outside the work area to the lockers. I had waited for an extra hour and a half, even taking a closing position from a coworker, just so that he would go home before me. Well, my lock was unlocked all the way and I was now freaked out. I opened the locker to grab my bag and go, but I noticed it. A rolled up piece of drawing paper. I know what kind it was because I myself am an artist. Unrolling it, it was a naked girl. A naked girl that resembled my video game character on World of Warcraft. I had briefly mentioned my WoW addiction to my group on the first group training day. I didn't even realize that he had heard any of that, much less memorized the information. Suddenly he walks up even though he should be long gone by then, and he confronts me. He asked me if I liked it, and because he seemed angry, I said yes. I suggested that he didn't do it anymore as my boyfriend wouldn't like this kind of gift at all. He rolled his eyes and playfully giggled at me like I was joking with him. I wasn't. Not only did he follow me the whole way out to the work grounds, he got on the employee shuttle that I got on to have witnesses. He sat right next to me, leaning on me. I felt like a deer in headlights, mentally begging someone to suggest that he shouldn't be that close to me. But no one paid any attention. Instead, I spent the whole drive trying to get this man to pull his arm off of my shoulders. I felt nauseated and my head was spinning. After we got off, I practically dashed off the bus and ran to my boyfriend who parked the car at the entrance to the employee parking zone. I got in the car and told him to go. He took off and I started crying. I told my boyfriend what had happened and he was upset. He wanted to turn around and confront the creepy coworker, but I talked him out of it through tears. I promised that I would talk to my managers after that. Well, I kept looking for the right time to pull the manager aside, but never got the chance the next night I went in. Now creepy coworker's attitude did another 180, and he was extremely weirdly playful. And then he crossed the final line. He grabbed my butt where customers could easily see him. My coworkers kind of laughed and thought it was a game, because at this time I was pissed and pushed to my limit. I went after him and legitimately punched him in the butt and shouted in his face, "How do you like that, huh?" Seething, he seemed unfazed by my anger. Instead, he laughed it off and he winked at me. I went down into the basement for the employee bathroom and quickly threw up the contents of my stomach. I cried in the stall, praying to God that this would stop. I quickly made an excuse, using my chronic illness, and I went home. So fast forward a few weeks, and he had completely swapped out his shift so that he wouldn't work with me. I felt like I had won the battle. I sent a message and he realized that he had crossed boundaries. Until the night before Christmas Eve. I had a terrible feeling as my boyfriend was driving me to work that night. I felt gross. I got to work and he was there, flirting with other girls, suddenly having this big ego that I had never seen him display before. Like I said when I met him, he was shy and awkward. It's like his personality flipped every time that I had to see him. I never knew which side of CC I was gonna get. That night, he actually stopped off as all the other coworkers, including myself, closed the joint. We were scrubbing the floors like normal and he didn't seem altogether, and so he clocked out early and I relaxed. I figured he had gotten in trouble since one of our 4 managers seemed to be upset that he had clocked out without permission. I was there extra late. The evening festivities were done with for the night and my zone was pretty much closed off from customers. And so I walked through the massive property that is my work to get to the street. I had started taking new ways to meet my boyfriend who picked me up, just so I couldn't be followed. This time, I was going to walk straight out of the grounds and onto the street where the bus stops were, and my boyfriend would be waiting at the curb. I was about halfway through my approximately 12-minute walk, and I was in a dark area. Out of nowhere, as I'm sure you've already guessed, creepy coworker shows up. He starts yelling my name and following me from behind. I pretend to not notice and walk faster. He yells my name again and seems angrier, and so I sprint for it. I sprint all the way to cross the shuttle zone and end up crashing into someone's chest. Thank God it was actually my boyfriend, who had a really bad feeling and wanted to be as close to my work exit as possible. I looked back and creepy coworker got on a shuttle but was staring from the window, smiling like a Cheshire cat the whole time. Never in my life had I been so terrified. After that, the next night was Christmas Eve and I was supposed to work, but I just knew if I went in, something bad was going to happen to me. So, crying the whole time because I knew I had earned a bunch of points for calling out to avoid him, I cried asking the lady on the phone if I was going to get fired, and she said she honestly couldn't say. I respected that but knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this creep make me lose my job that I had worked so hard to get, even changing my appearance to fit their strict standards. No, so I wrote to the only person I could think of, my trainer, Christy. She was a lead and she is the kindest girl you would ever meet. She had a heart of gold. You just knew being her friend meant that you would have a trusted confidant for life. I told her everything. I sent her these screenshots of the text messages he sent to me. I finally told someone with an ounce of leadership that I was scared to go to work. Immediately she responded and asked if she could tell the managers. Even though I was incredibly nervous, I told her yes. The next day I was pulled in, and God bless my ex-manager Christopher, because he was shocked at everything that had happened to me, and quickly helped me write a report for HR. He had led me through the steps and even changed the schedule so I wouldn't work with a creepy coworker unless he specifically traded shifts. 2 months go by, and I am well acquainted with the responsibilities for my work at this point, and I'm comfortable. But of course, there's no stopping a stalker. He had traded his shift and was working the night shift with me. He was angry every time he looked at me, and I avoided him at all costs. And then around halfway through my shift, I'm down in the basement coming back from the restroom. I'm walking up the steps that lead back to my work area, and then I feel someone behind me. Before I could even think a clear thought, I was pushed against the wall, a hand beside my head. He leans in and says, "You should smile more." And then the guy chuckles and walks away. I feel pretty hysterical at this point and I run to the closest lead, crying and trying to explain what happened. It was at this point that my manager Christopher, pissed off that HR was taking so long to investigate my case, went to them to speed it up. Well, after 4 months of an interview process with HR, finally the case was resolved and not only was he let go, but I was doing really well in my job finally. Nothing to worry me into not paying attention to my duties. The creepy coworker has left me alone ever since, but sometimes I get random friend requests from guys with no pictures and always similar names, always close to his name. This primarily happened to my mom, but this has badly affected me mentally too with worry. She wanted me to post this just to give people a heads up so that you can encounter creeps literally anywhere. This is going to be long-winded, sorry, but I just wanted to get in every detail possible. This happened last month and we still don't actually know what happened with Jeremy in the end. I'm a 19-year-old female who is studying in a university in England, entering my 2nd year last month. We decided to stay in my university town the day before I was due to move into my student home, so I could get there early and move my stuff in, and give me the rest of the day to relax before we started Freshers Week. The night before moving day, me and my mother stayed in a motel located in my university town. We were greeted by a very friendly man called Jeremy. Jeremy was very attentive and showed us to our room and stayed around 10 minutes, telling us the history of the motel, and he repeatedly asked us if we needed help unpacking and stuff, which we kindly rejected. It was a Friday, so me and my mother went around the town and had a few drinks. Nothing too heavy as Freshers Week started the next day, so I wanted to be fresh for the Saturday night. And before going out, Jeremy explained that he never works on the weekends, so he told us to have a good night and wished me luck with the rest of my university journey. He gave me a hug and gave my mother a hug, and a slight kiss while moving his hand down towards her butt, which she found weird but brushed it off as nothing. My mom is 37 but looks young for her age, and Jeremy's easily in his 40s. So we just thought Jeremy may have fancied his chances with her. Moving on, me and my mom have a great night around the town, and watch a couple of live bands and have a few wines, so we're a little bit tipsy. We get back to the motel, then the bar is still open, so we decide to have a nightcap. While we are drinking in the bar, Jeremy emerges from a back room and spots us and makes a couple of jokes. Jeremy then proceeds to watch a video on his phone on full volume of a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, as if she was being murdered. The screaming was blood-curdling and made me and my mom unsettled, and also another couple in the bar looked a little concerned as well. The video went on for about 3 or 4 minutes before Jeremy laughed and went into the back. When we make our way to bed, my mom had taken her shoes off after they had become painful after dancing in the bars earlier. Jeremy emerges from the back room and puts his arm around my mom and says, "Oh, let me help you to your room, honey. You must be wasted after all of that drinking." My mom isn't actually drunk but insists she is fine, but Jeremy persists and basically follows us to our room and proceeds to come in. But I bid him goodnight and close the door pretty much in his face before locking it. The next morning, we're up early and make our way down for breakfast. The young girl working takes our order, only for Jeremy to bring them out insisting the eggs are cooked to perfection, although he claimed he never worked weekends. Me and my mom are weirded out by Jeremy at this stage and check out straight after breakfast. Jeremy sees us out and says these exact words, "I'll be seeing you very soon, Christy." My mother's name. Anyway, at the time it doesn't strike us as too unusual, and my mom drives me to my new home and helps me unpack and stuff. She helps me to unpack and leaves in the early afternoon, as she had to work that evening in our local bar. The rest of the day goes by without much going on. But that night, I'm out drinking with my housemates and I get a call from my mom, saying that Jeremy had just come into the bar where she works at. This is no coincidence, as when we were having our nightcap, Jeremy would have heard us talking about the bar where my mom works, and he also had our address, which needed to be provided at the motel for whatever reason. He also said to my mom that when she was pouring his pint, that she should go around to his friend's house after his shift, which was just around the corner. This call really scared the crap out of me. About half an hour later, my mom called me and said that Jeremy had left the bar after she had rejected his offer to go to his friend's house later. But Jeremy had said that he would be back for her later. This was really worrying, and I told her to make sure a customer was with her, as she was locking up on her own that evening. After this call, I felt sick and didn't join my friends in going to the nightclubs. In the meantime, I called my dad, who no longer speaks to my mom. They aren't on bad terms, they just chose not to keep in contact with each other after they split up a few years ago. My dad is a club bouncer, but he wasn't on duty that night. But I called him and begged him just to drive down there and make sure everything was okay. My dad clearly knew by my shaky voice that I was panicked, scared, and helpless. 1 a.m. rolled around and I didn't get a response from either my mom or my dad's phone. I was worried sick and hoped that Jeremy hadn't been waiting around a corner and done something to my mom when she was locking up. At 1:30 a.m., my mom finally rang me in hysterics. As she had been locking up, Jeremy had pulled up in a car with 3 other men and shouted at her to get in the car for a ride. My mom declined his advances and he got out of the car and approached her and told her that he won't tell her again. He said that she had been flirting and teasing him ever since she had checked in last night. She told Jeremy that was complete BS and she wasn't at all into him. As Jeremy got closer to her, she could smell heavy liquor. As Jeremy went to grab my mom, my dad pulls up behind the car and beeps his horn. This causes Jeremy to go back to the car and climb back in, and tells my mom that he knows where she lives and that he'll be waiting. The car screeches off and my dad then gets out of his car and tells her that I had told him to check on her. Scared to go home alone, she asked my dad to drop her off at my grandmother's, as she didn't want to be alone. After that night, we never saw Jeremy again, but my mom did make a report to the police about him and gave them a full account of what had happened, but she hasn't heard back from them. I'm just so relieved that my dad had turned up to the pub when he did, as Jeremy would have easily been able to get my mom into that car, as she was only very small in stature, 5'2" and about 120 pounds. I just hope that scumbag got what was coming to him and is behind bars. My mom has been pretty badly affected by this and is only now comfortable being alone in her house. I was maybe 15 years old and my family took a trip to a ski motel. I'm the oldest of 2 boys and a girl who was maybe 6 at the time. She was adorable, big blue eyes and crazy blonde hair. Bold and mature for her age because she grew up around big kids. My younger brother, maybe 8, my little sister and myself decided to hang out in the sauna. We had been to the motel a few times before, and I was 15, a reasonable age to go off for an hour or so with just my siblings. Well, stupidly, while in the sauna we wanted something from the motel room or wanted to tell our parents something. This was before you brought your cell phone everywhere you went, and I sent my little sister to do it. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid we were, but you know how immature kids think. Get the little one to do it. Some time passes and we heard my sister come pounding down the hallway in her pink bathing suit, sprinting, and an older man speed walking behind her. I'll never forget how he looked. He was hunched forward, walking as quickly as he could, eyes boring to my little sister, a tight frown framed by his white mustache. My brother and I were watching in absolute shock, trying to understand what was going on. The sauna had a glass door looking down the hallway. I grabbed my sister into the sauna, staring at the man with wide eyes, scared but defensive. The man instantly freezes when he sees us, picks up, walking more slowly, walks by the sauna. It was at the end of the hallway, nowhere else to go, and looks to a door next to the sauna that led to the gym and mimes, "Oh," as if that was what he was looking for. Mind you, he was wearing a collared shirt and slacks. He looked like he was actually shaking a bit. I asked my sister what had happened, and she said shortly after leaving the room, he came out of nowhere and started following her, and she got scared and began running, and he kept up with her. I told my mom what had happened, and of course, she was so pissed we had sent a little girl out in a bathing suit through a motel by herself. I still get sick when I think about what could have happened. If he had grabbed her before she had made it to the sauna, I still see his gross mustache in my mind, and get angry when my mind replays his sheepish, "Oh," as if he chasing a small girl down a hallway is normal to do while looking for the gym. I feel guilty for slighting her and guilty for not saying something to him or reporting him. I sometimes wonder if he had done this before or after, but I remind myself how young I was, and I'm just glad I was with them. Had it been just her and my little brother, who knows what could have happened. So this happened 2 years ago. I was about 16 on a trip to Armenia with my family. We had rented a car and driven around the whole country for about 2 weeks. The incident happened about halfway through the trip, and it scared the living daylights out of me. So, my family and I were staying in a really fancy motel for a night. My parents had decided to book it as a little treat, because they usually just go for the more regular and simple ones. We were all excited to stay there. It was big and luxurious, with an indoor pool and gym. We all collectively decided to go for a dip in the indoor pool. It was really fun. We swam around, played with some volleyballs, and just enjoyed the fact that we were the only ones in the pool. After having had our fill of splashing around, one by one my family members decided to head back to our rooms to take a shower, until there was only my mother and I left. That was when the creepy guy arrived. We were still in the pool, sitting in the water when a motel staff member entered the pool room. I knew that he was staff because he looked like a local, and went to turn on the pool lights by the switch box on the other side of the pool. The first thing that struck me as odd was that he purposefully walked by us and stared directly at me with a creepy smile. I was a bit weirded out, but many people looked at us weirdly because we looked like Europeans, light hair and light skin, which is unusual for them. Anyways, he stayed in the room, doing something in the corner while my mom decided that it was time for her to leave the pool and head back. Because I shared my room with my sister, and I knew she was probably still in the shower, I remained in the pool. After my mother left, however, the guy kept giving me looks and staring at me, so I quickly changed my mind. I got out of the water, took my towel, and started walking out. The man decided to come to talk to me. He tells me how pretty I am, how he thinks I'm beautiful. He asks for my age, and all in broken English. I just smile, nod, thank him, and leave. Again creepy, but not unusual. I go into the woman's bathroom just next to the room with the pool, and it's just one bathroom, which is perfect since all I wanted to do was quickly change out of my swimsuit and into some dry clothes so I don't leave a trail of water in the nice motel. About halfway through changing, a sudden thought struck me. I hadn't locked the door. So half naked, I just turn around and switch the lock. I kid you not, 10 seconds pass and the doorknob wiggles. I innocently enough just guessed it was another guest wanting to change for a swim, or the cleaning lady. I'm done maybe a minute after and step out of the bathroom, and I see no one. Well, no one except for the creepy guy walking away from the bathrooms. At that moment it hit me that he was the one trying to open my door. He turns around, smiles, and walks back towards me. I booked it back to the pool to grab my stupid shoes that I had forgotten, and he's right behind, a bit too close for comfort, and he keeps giving me those creepy compliments. I just give him fake smiles and tell him that I have to go. He then follows me out of the pool area, proceeding to walk just behind me. I arrive at the exit of the wing with the pool, gym, and bathroom, and I see the door is closed. My heart stops. I'm terrified that he might have locked it. I have never been so relieved as when I opened the door with no problem. I almost ran out of there, him still standing at the door. I climb the stairs to go to my room, trying to calm myself down. I get to my floor, and that's when I hear the elevator doors open. Guess who steps out? The creepy guy. He comes out of the elevator, walks to me still smiling, and points towards a flight of stairs leading to the rooftop. He asked me if I wanted to join him on the roof and to look at the view together. I shakily decline his offer and run to my room. I get in, lock the door, and hope that he doesn't come knocking. I saw him around the motel a few times after that. He always tried to talk to me. I told my parents and they freaked out. But we didn't say anything since it appeared that he was someone quite important in the motel. A manager or something. After talking to my mom the other day, I had just remembered a shady encounter my brother had. When I was 8, I'm 20 now. My entire family moved from San Diego County to the middle of freaking nowhere in Colorado. After less than 2 years of being there and having to put up with the ridiculous weather, my oldest brother decided he had finally had enough. He got his GED, packed up all of his things in his crappy Saab, left his ferrets behind for us to take care of since they're illegal in California, and headed west to move in with his friend. Or at least he had tried to. He didn't even make it 5 hours before his car completely died because it couldn't handle driving through the Rockies. He was stranded in a tiny podunk town after dark, and his car got towed to a garage while the tow truck driver offered to drive him to a cheap but nice motel to spend the night since we couldn't come get him until the next day. They had passed by a Motel 6 or some other chain motel like that, but the driver said, I wouldn't leave my dog in that place. There's a way nicer motel just down the road for the same price. And he kept driving until they showed up at this really run-down looking place. My brother thought that it looked pretty bad, but he's kind of a shy and non-confrontational person. Plus, he's scrawny and completely unintimidating. so he didn't say anything and he just thanked the guy. He couldn't see it at night, but when my mom and I got there the next day, we realized just how weird this place was. They had a big pool smack dab in the middle of the parking lot, but it was drained dry and looked like it had never been used. The entire family that owned the motel, the mom, dad, daughter, and son, sat on plastic lawn chairs in between the pool and the building the front desk was in, facing the motel rooms, all day long. And then we saw the inside of his room. The bathroom had a small window, which isn't unusual, but it was only 2 feet off the ground, and next to the toilet with nothing covering it or obstructing the view of anyone using the toilet, meaning anyone outside, like the owners, could watch you doing your business. There wasn't even a spot for a toilet paper holder, so the roll just had to sit on a shelf, and the whole room looked pretty run down. My brother then quietly told us he barely got any sleep the night before because he was so terrified. At first, we assumed it was just because he was sleeping in a strange place by himself when he was only 17. But he pointed out a door near his bed. His room was the kind where it connected to the room next to it by a hallway, only a few feet long with a door in each room. So, large families staying in adjacent rooms can keep it open and get between the two without having to deal with the keys. He said that he heard faint noises coming from the room next to his the night before, so he opened his door to see what was going on, and there was enough of a gap underneath to see that someone was standing right on the other side of the far door. My brother watched for a few minutes and the guy's shadow never shifted, so he got creeped out and closed his own door, making sure to lock it and went to bed. He woke up at some point to a strange sound and sat there trying to identify it for a minute, before he suddenly realized it was a doorknob rattling. The guy had finally opened his own door and was trying to get into my brother's room. The sound stopped after a few minutes, but he was too scared to fall back asleep, in case the guy had tried again and picked the lock. And he was telling us the story quietly just in case the guy could hear him through the walls. He never saw what he looked like, but who knows if the guy watched him while he checked into the room or something. I have no idea what he was planning on doing to my brother, but I'm sure it was no good. Add this to the strange, frustrating conversation my mom had with the owner of the motel over the phone on the drive up, and the weird-ass mechanic shop the car was towed to, and the town became one of the creepiest places that we'd ever had the misfortune of stopping in. It would have cost more to fix the car than it was actually worth, so we just abandoned it, and my brother had to come back home again, which he was actually happy to do so after such a freaky experience. A little bit of backstory. I had just finished high school and had recently turned 18 when all of this occurred. I was looking forward to starting university and was going to move out of my parents' house into student housing closer to the campus. As a result, I started looking for a job closer to my residence. I found one about a 5-minute walk from where I was going to be living, and it was perfect for me. I was to be a barista in a tiny little coffee kiosk on one of the coolest streets in the city. This street was sort of known for prostitution and drugs, but it was also super popular as it hosted some of the most interesting events and also contained some of the nicest thrift stores in the city. What was even more ideal about my new job was the fact that I worked right across the road from my best friend. Let's call her Phoebe. At the time, Phoebe was in love with her job. She was actively being given more responsibilities and she was being promised the world by her employers. Many of these promises turned out to be false at the time, but that's another story. During one of her shifts, Phoebe was approached by a man who had seemingly become a regular at the place that she was working. We'll call him Richard. He told her that if she ever wanted to leave her job, he had just become the manager of a new restaurant a little ways down the road. Phoebe kindly denied his offer. He approached her several more times with this same offer before she recommended him our other close friend. We can call her Mia. Mia was hesitant to take the position at first because She had a passionate hatred for hospitality and greatly prefers retail, but she did need the extra money at the time and she took the job. The day that Mia was signing her contract, Phoebe and I both finished work early around 4. So we told Mia that we would meet her at her new job once we had finished, and then we would go and do something after. Phoebe and I went to the cake shop next door and sat outside her work while we waited for Mia. When they finished, Richard followed Mia outside to come say hi to Phoebe. The girls introduced him to me and a conversation ensued. He seemed like a friendly guy, if not a little bit awkward. He was late 30s, early 40s, bird-like in appearance, quite short, balding, larger in size, and he seemed very greasy. As the conversation continued, I began to tease Mia a little bit as friends do. I saw no harm in it, as she was one of my best friends and she had made a similar joke at my expense prior to this interaction. Richard's demeanor suddenly seemed to switch. He became somewhat catty in defense of Mia. He retorted back that if I was going to be mean to his staff, that he would bar me from every store in the street that we worked on. This seemed ridiculous, but he claimed to be friends with the security guard that worked in the street. I actually was friends with this man, and when I asked him about it, he told me that he had never heard of Richard before. Richard said these things to me as though he was joking, but he was so persistent about it that I got incredibly uncomfortable and I wanted to cry. It was from this interaction that he nicknamed me Trouble. I also feel it needs to be noted that he didn't scold Mia or Phoebe at all for the same behavior. Phoebe sensed my discomfort and told me that we had to leave as we had plans. Flash forward a few weeks and Phoebe and I decide to go see Mia at work again. Richard intrudes on our conversation yet again, and again he singles me out from the group, teasing me and only referring to me as Trouble. This time I just play along as I can tell it isn't going to stop. He asks Mia if she is after another job as he needs someone to clean his home, and lives all the way out where my parents and Mia live. Mia tells him that she can't as she already has too many responsibilities. But I tell him that I might know a few people in the area that might do it, and I give him my phone number. Richard takes this as a sign that I have agreed to do it myself, and begins texting me incessantly about setting up a meeting. This man is much older than me and lives alone in a rural area. Suddenly, my instincts kick in, and I try to get out of it by telling him that I can't drive. He says that he can pick me up from the nearest train station. I don't want to come across as impolite or have my best friend's boss resent her because of me, so I make the mistake of agreeing. However, I tell him that my sister will be helping me as she is looking for a part-time job, and my dad will be dropping me off. I do this in order to have some backup and so that my dad knows my whereabouts. Richard goes on to complain about how I don't trust him, and claims that his house is very small, and the $100 that he's going to pay me won't be enough to split with my sister. I tell him that I just want to provide her with work experience, and finally agrees, asking how old she is. My sister is 17. Richard and I finally find a time that I am not working to schedule a meeting. This meeting is held at his place of work, and I feel a lot more comfortable sitting in the main restaurant surrounded by people, as I thought he was going to hold a meeting in an office. We begin talking about the responsibilities of the job. He tells me it'll be basic things like tidying up, vacuuming, the usual. I agree, and he then goes to tell me that he will also be expecting me to do his laundry. I think this is a bit odd, as he's only paying a small amount for such a large job. He assures me his house is small and not that messy, but continuously claims it just needs a woman's touch. I nod and ignore the fact that this grown man thinks that, just because he's a man, it means he doesn't need to know how to maintain his own home. Now, this is where things start to get creepy. Near the end of the meeting, he asks me again how old my sister is, and when I say 17, his face drops. He then starts telling me about how he previously posted this ad on Craigslist, and this 60-year-old woman replied offering to do it in her lingerie. He tells me how he didn't even ask for that in the ad, but she had offered it and he was put off completely. He then proceeds to tell me that he would be willing to pay more to someone between the ages of 18 and 30 if they were willing to do that, but he would never request that because he's not a pervert. I call BS at this and tell him then and there that this meeting is done, and that I have to go and meet Phoebe. He asked me if he had made me uncomfortable. Well, yeah, you did. But I say no on that. I'll get back to him. This strange man who I've only met 3 times then attempts to hug me, but I ignore it and awkwardly wave goodbye from less than 3 feet away. I boost it down the street to Phoebe's work and tell her the whole story. She tells me that I can't do it and I tell her I know, but I don't know how to tell him that without risking my own safety or Mia's job. Fortunately, Richard gives me the perfect out. He texts me later this afternoon telling me the hopes that I am okay with cats because he is a small one. I see this as the perfect opportunity and lie to him, telling him that my sister and I are both deathly allergic, and neither of us will be open to doing the job. Richard accepts this reasoning after a little persuasion, and I think that I'm finally done with him. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Richard proceeded to text me every day asking if I'm mad at him, or if he had made me uncomfortable, asking me how my day was and so on. Just behaving like a preteen in a new relationship basically. And the more that I ignored him, the more he texted. I finally blocked him in March of 2019. This escapade had begun 4 to 5 months prior to this. The blocking didn't stop him though. Mia informed me that Richard was no longer going to be working there, as he had to go in for surgery and we wouldn't have to see him anymore. You see, Richard hadn't only been harassing me, but to Mia and Phoebe too, just to a lesser extent. One Saturday morning while I was working, setting up at around 7:45, Richard showed up at my work. The divider was down as we were close, so he came and stood in the doorway, the only exit that I had available to me at the time. He started asking me why I was ignoring him and telling me about his surgery. I told him that he wasn't allowed to stand there as it was a fire exit, but he didn't budge. Fortunately, my boss showed up shortly after and told Richard that he was going to phone the security if he didn't move. My boss was kind of an ass on most days, but holy crap, was I grateful for him that morning. Roughly a month after that experience, I thought Richard was gone from my life. I was living in my new apartment. Mia was around all the time and loved her job without Richard there. Things were going well for us. One morning after a night of drinking, me and the flatmates became peckish. I decided to order us some greasy food on a food delivery app. Lo and behold, guess who our delivery driver is? Yeah, Richard. I turn to my boyfriend at the time and tell him that he has to go collect the food. He doesn't understand, but Mia assures him that it's important. He agrees and goes out to collect it. Richard is not driving the vehicle he claims to be driving in the app, and at first we're confused. Plus, the number plate is also different. Mia and I watch from his bedroom window, and the interaction takes much longer than expected. He comes back and we ask what took him so long. He tells us that Richard refused to give him the food until he could prove that he was my boyfriend. He had recognized my name from the app and now he knew where we lived. Me and I tell my flatmates the story of what happened, and we all agree that it's a good idea to go to my RA. The RA reports it to upper management, and they say they can't really do anything about it, but if he comes in again, to call their security. A few months go by and there are no Richard sightings until I order from the same app again. Yet again, Richard is our driver, and yet again in a different car. I send my boyfriend to go collect the food again and report the incident to my RA again, and the food delivery app. I know that I was stupid in not immediately reporting it to campus security, as I had much more proof of the creepy behavior than he had of his innocence, but I was naive, and I didn't want my parents to find out about it at the time. Fortunately, I haven't seen Richard since then. This is actually my stepmom and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me up to a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're gonna call her Macy, grew up as a kind of privileged teen in the 70s. And her mom had moved with her family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school and a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. And my stepmom has raccoon eyes and it looks like she's hating everything. Anyways, because of Louie's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, you know, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my mom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out and she groaned into Lily and begrudgingly said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking, and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get in the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat, and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak out my stepmom, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be, and he said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16 and 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a foot on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information. They just drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack, log cabin looking like place right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it saying, "I'll be right back, don't go anywhere," and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. And so they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude just to run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried, red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her crap after seeing it, and my mom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees, until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying that she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is in the 70s, there's no cell phones, there was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed like to be a couple of hours, when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom predictably started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was planning her dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to the car as quickly as they could, jumped in and peeled out before they'd even shut the doors.